Christmas was always a big event to my family. Every year we'd drive out to my aunt and uncle's house where I'd get to see all of my cousins as well as my grandparents. There's one year I still think about a lot, though, because something happened that I still can't get out of my head. I was only 10 at the time, and I was a relatively shy kid, so meeting new people wasn't enjoyable at all. This year, though, when we arrived at my uncle's house, my oldest cousin introduced all of us to her boyfriend, Drew. Apparently, they'd been together for a few years and things were getting pretty serious, so she wanted the whole family to get comfortable with him. From what I heard, they met at the college they both went to, which wasn't far, but Drew was from out of state, so my uncle offered him to stay at his house during winter break. Anyway, over the next couple of days, I remember avoiding him as much as possible. I really didn't want to talk to some stranger I didn't know, and I definitely didn't want him to act like he was my big brother. However, my younger brother, who was only 6, was talking to him all the time. It was like they had just become best friends in just 2 days. My parents thought it was cute that my little brother was looking up to him, but I found it to be weird. I don't know. Something about it just made me feel uncomfortable. During the nights, I shared a room with my brother, and I'm assuming Drew and my cousin shared a room on the other side of the house. I asked my little brother, as we were getting ready for bed, why he liked Drew so much. He just talked about how cool he was. I don't really know what I expected my 6-year-old brother to say, but when he responded, it kind of clicked to my mind that I really should be wondering why Drew wanted to talk to my brother so much, not the other way around. I know this all sounds like it may just be taken into bad context when it could just be a loving soon-to-be cousin-in-law, but it was just a feeling in my gut that told me something was off. And just 4 days after we had arrived, on the night of Christmas Eve, my gut feeling was proven to be right. I specifically remember going to bed that night, noticing my brother having a lot more energy, way more than he should have at that time of night. I thought it was because he was excited about Christmas morning, as I was too, and I went to sleep soon after. Sometime later, hours later, I woke up. I don't know what actually woke me up, as the house seemed silent, but I instantly noticed my brother was not in his bed. My eyes widened, and I looked all around the room, calling out his name in a whisper. I felt protective of my little brother, and I was really worried about him. I almost wanted to cry when I saw that his jacket was missing. We both had been hanging them up on the handles of the closet door, but his was gone. I grabbed mine and rushed downstairs. From the bottom of the steps was a hallway. On one side was the front door, and on the other was the back door. Looking at the back door, the screen door was closed, but the actual door was open. I remember being scared, but more than anything, I wanted to make sure my little brother was okay, so I walked outside. Out in the field behind the house, I could see 2 figures, one large and one small. They seemed to be walking away from the house, but it was dark and hard to tell. I walked a bit closer, then gathered the courage to yell my brother's name. Both figures stopped for a moment, and then the smaller one started running toward me. My baby brother ran into my arms. His eyes were watery. I looked back up, and the other figure was still standing in the field, looking in our direction. I led my brother back inside and up to our bedroom. I asked what had happened and what he was doing outside. All he would say was that he was scared of the dark, but Drew wanted to play a game. I didn't know what that meant, but I didn't care. Waking up a 6-year-old and leading them outside in the middle of the night was not okay. I kept my brother close for the rest of the holiday, but now I wish I had told someone about it. I was a shy kid that didn't want to be the center of any drama, and I didn't think anyone would believe me, so I kept my mouth shut about it. That was a horrible Christmas, though, and I think about it a lot. I've asked my brother years later what that Drew guy was doing, but even now he says he doesn't remember. He only remembers being scared. My cousin never brought him to any more gatherings, so I'm assuming things didn't work out. I'm glad I saved my brother from whatever was going to happen that night, but I think back to it a lot, wishing that I had done more. Five years ago, when I was in my late teens and early 20s, I worked as a dancer and lived in some rough neighborhoods. Because I was young and didn't know any better, I ended up in a few risky situations. I was renting a place in one of the worst parts of my small city. My boyfriend at the time lived nearby, just down a long one-way street that led to a big intersection. It was around 10 p.m. on Christmas night, and he had just gotten back from spending time at his family's house. He mentioned he had a few things to take care of at home, so I was left waiting for him. Now, at the time, I didn't have a car, and since he hadn't bothered to pick me up on his way back, I was getting more and more frustrated. Eventually, I decided to walk to his apartment. It wasn't a smart choice, especially since the street I had to walk down was a long one-way road in a really bad neighborhood. The area was known for being dangerous, especially at night. But I wasn't thinking clearly. I just wanted to get to his place and didn't want to wait any longer. The street was set up with a few houses, but most of it was taken up by a big elementary school and a huge recreational field next to it. The whole area was really dark at night, and to get to his house I had to walk against traffic, so any cars coming down the road would be facing me directly. I made it about halfway down the street. On my right side was the school and the field, and on my left was the road, and that's when I noticed a car coming toward me. I didn't think much about the car, but then it started to slow down as it pulled up next to me. All four windows rolled down. Inside, there were four big young men, two in the front and two in the back. They started shouting at me and saying other inappropriate things in a really aggressive way. I tried to ignore them and kept walking, but I sped up, hoping to get to the busy, well-lit intersection near my boyfriend's house as quickly as possible. At this point, they were yelling at me to come back, but there wasn't really any space for them to turn the car around. The only way they could circle back around was across the street, far down the road. I was already feeling nervous, but then things got worse. Out of nowhere, they put the car in park, and all four of them started getting out. As soon as I saw them getting out of the car, I started running as fast as I could toward the intersection. I honestly don't think I've ever run that fast in my life. Thankfully, because it was a one-way street, I was already pretty far ahead of them by the time they got out of the car. They didn't have enough time to circle back around before I made it to my boyfriend's house. I'm not even sure if they tried, but just knowing they put the car in park in the middle of the street, got out in the freezing cold, and started yelling and coming after me was terrifying. When I told my boyfriend, he was really upset that I didn't just wait for him. He said it could have ended really badly, and honestly, I believe he's right. It goes without saying that this wasn't the first time something like this happened, but it was definitely the last time I walked around that neighborhood alone at night. It was December 2020. My fiancé and I bought a house together a few years ago. It's a cute house in a decent neighborhood, a nice area to raise a family. That's why what happened 2 years ago was all the more shocking and disgusting. We know all of our neighbors, both our next-door neighbors and the 3 closest neighbors across the street. Everyone is friendly enough, but you truly never know the skeletons hidden in someone's closet. Our neighbor Paul, to the right, always seemed nice. The few times we'd speak, but he never really spoke too much. I'd see him outside almost every day, either coming or leaving for, I'm assuming, work, though I never knew what he did for a living. At this time, I hadn't seen the guy in a few days, and his car hadn't moved from his driveway. Obviously, that in of itself isn't any cause for alarm. All the neighbors, including Paul, had their lights up already. I found it interesting how Paul, a single man in his 40s, would put lights up. I actually found it kind of nice. I was late to the party putting my Christmas lights and decorations up outside. One night, while doing so, I noticed Paul's Christmas lights out of nowhere started flickering like crazy. All of them, not just one strip of lights. It looked like it could have just been faulty wiring or some electrical glitch. The next day, I left for work around 10 o'clock and noticed again Paul's car was still in the driveway. I also noticed all the blinds in his house were still closed. Even when I got back from work, the blinds were all closed, but his Christmas lights were on, so he was definitely home. I joked with my fiancé that he must have been on some kind of hibernation. Later that night, my fiancé came inside and told me of Paul's Christmas lights acting up. I went outside, and it was the exact same thing that was happening the night before. The flickering wasn't happening in a way that would appear that he programmed it that way. It was happening in a very glitchy sort of way. So, I figured I'd be nice and go let him know and also see if he's okay since I hadn't seen him. I knocked on the door, and when there was no answer, I rang. All the blinds were closed, and I couldn't tell if the lights were on or not. When there was no answer, I rang one more time. Finally, the door opened, and Paul greeted me. I let him know about his flickering lights, which I just noticed weren't flickering anymore. I promised him I wasn't making it up. He said he wasn't aware of that and thanked me. I asked if he was all right, as I hadn't seen him in a while. He said he was just feeling under the weather. He was acting a bit off. Then, I heard something from inside the house. At first, I thought I was imagining it, but it sounded like a child screaming for help. Paul didn't have any kids. I was about to ask him, "Did you hear that?" But on the spot, I decided not to. I said goodbye and walked back to my house. Then I told my fiancée to call the police right now. I think Paul has a child in his house. Her reaction was literally, "What did you say?" I said, "I think Paul kidnapped a child." So, I called the police and said, "I think I heard a child screaming inside my neighbor's house." My neighbor, who doesn't have kids and hasn't been leaving his house the past week or two, I asked to keep who made the call anonymous, though I knew Paul wouldn't be so stupid as to not know it was me who made the call. Sure enough, the police arrived and entered his house. When I heard what they found, I was appalled. There was a young boy locked in the basement. He had been locked down there for 4 days. The boy had been kidnapped from a completely different town. As for the flickering lights, the boy was a genius and somehow found a way from the basement to flicker the Christmas lights as an attempt to call for help and get someone's attention outside. Probably whenever he saw someone through one of the blocked-off basement windows. I reckon he saw his chance to call for help when me was at the front door. Clearly, a very smart kid with great survival instincts. I'm glad he was reunited with his family. I don't want to know what was done to him, but I hope he lives a normal life and has put this behind him. Knowing how serious of a crime child kidnapping is, Paul won't be getting out of prison anytime soon. When I was about 8 or 9 years old, something strange and terrifying happened on Christmas Eve. Something I've never forgotten. At that age, I still believed in Santa Claus like most kids. I was both nervous and excited, imagining him sneaking into our house, quietly leaving presents under the tree. I remember lying in bed, trying my hardest to fall asleep, but my thoughts were racing. The excitement buzzed in the air, like static electricity. Eventually, I managed to drift off, but the silence of the night didn't last long. I woke up to the sound of soft footsteps. They were faint, slow, and deliberate, almost like someone was trying not to make any noise, but still walking around the room. My heart immediately began to race, and I thought, it's Santa Claus. He had to be. Who else could it be? I felt a surge of fear. I was too scared to open my eyes fully, not wanting to ruin the magic of the moment or make him leave. I didn't want to disappoint him by being awake. Slowly, I cracked one eye open, just a sliver, and what I saw made my blood run cold. A dark figure stood beside my bed. The figure was tall, at least 6 feet, and its body was completely black, darker than the room around it. It was as though it absorbed the light, becoming part of the shadows. I couldn't make out any eyes, nose, or mouth. Its face was featureless, like an empty void, but I could clearly see the outline of its head, arms, body, and legs. It was humanoid, like a tall person, but nothing about it felt human. Frozen in fear, I couldn't move. I wanted to scream, but my voice caught in my throat. The room felt thick, as if the air had turned heavier, colder. I stayed perfectly still, trying to convince myself that it was just Santa Claus, that it was nothing to be afraid of. But deep down, I knew something was horribly wrong. I couldn't tear my gaze away from it. The figure didn't move at first, just standing there. I could feel its presence, its attention, and it felt like it was staring right through me, even though I couldn't see its face. You know that eerie sensation when someone is watching you, even if you can't see them? That's what it felt like. Like this figure was studying me, waiting for something. The air was thick with silence. It was suffocating. Then the figure took a step. The slow, deliberate sound of its footfall sent a shiver down my spine. Another step, and then another, until it was standing closer to my bed. The feeling of dread grew heavier in the room, and my heart pounded in my chest, like it was trying to break free. The figure leaned in, just enough that I could feel the coldness radiating from it, but it stayed a few feet away. It loomed over me, its presence so overwhelming that I could barely breathe. I shut my eyes as tightly as I could, trying to block it out, but the fear clawed at me, making me feel trapped. I could still feel it, though. Even with my eyes closed, I could sense it, like it was waiting, just waiting for something. Minutes passed, though it felt like hours. My body trembled, unable to make a sound or move a muscle. Then, I opened my eyes again, and it was gone, just like that. The silence in the room was deafening. The house, an old creaky building with doors that groaned and floors that creaked with every step, seemed unnaturally still. There were no more footsteps, no sound of a door opening. It was like the figure had disappeared into the shadows, leaving no trace of its presence, as though it had never been there at all. I stayed in my bed for a long time, staring into the darkness, trying to make sense of what had just happened. But nothing made sense. The next morning, I asked my mom if she had heard Santa come into my room the night before. She paused, confused, before she smiled and played along, probably thinking I was just making it up. But I knew it wasn't a person. It wasn't a dream. It was too real, too vivid to be my imagination. The house was full of energy that night. Christmas Eve, with all the lights, the excitement, the joy. I've heard that spirits or ghosts are often drawn to places full of energy, emotions, and excitement. And Christmas? It was full of all of that. But what was that thing? And why did it choose that night? Was it just a figment of my childhood imagination? Or was it something much darker? Something that slipped into our house on the one night when we were all at our most vulnerable? I'll never know for sure, but one thing is certain. I'll never forget the terror of that night. My name is Jordan, and this happened on Christmas morning of 2012. Seeing as this was about 12 years ago, I can't remember every detail, but I'll try my best to explain everything that happened. Ever since I was very young, I lived with my aunt and uncle throughout my childhood. Long story short, my mom was a major meth head, and my dad spent a long time in jail because of that. They were in no position to raise a kid, and that was why I went to live with my extended family. Ever since then, I felt happier around them, where they actually cared for me and my well-being. Anyway, it was Christmas morning, and me, being the excited 6-year-old I was, went out into the living room. Stacked under the tree were a bunch of presents and gifts. It was a child's dream come true. At that point in time, I ran to my aunt and uncle's room and woke them up to tell them that Santa had come. As tired as they were, they sucked it up and came out to watch me open my presents, just appreciating the Christmas spirit. I'd say it took us a full hour to open all of the presents before cleaning up all of the open wrapping paper and other trash. As I was holding the trash bag open, I thought I could see something from the corner of my eye by the stairs. That's when I looked over and saw 2 pairs of shoes walking upstairs. Being only 6, I could only assume it was Santa, so I dropped my bag and ran toward the stairs. I remember just looking up at the top of the stairs when my aunt asked me what I was looking at. I just responded with Santa and pointed up the stairs. This made my aunt and uncle laugh it off as me being imaginative or trying to be funny. In some way, my aunt came over to me, grabbed me by the hand, and then looked up at the stairs. When she saw it, at the top of the stairs in the guest bedroom was someone hiding behind the door. The room upstairs was dark, so she couldn't tell if it was a man or a woman. My aunt screamed at the top of her lungs and told my uncle to call the police. This caused me to start crying, as I didn't understand what was going on at the time. According to my aunt, whoever was up there didn't bother trying to run. They just sort of stayed where they were, hiding. Our neighborhood was located not too far from a police station, so they were able to get there pretty quickly. However, in similar situations like this, whoever we saw upstairs was gone. They got away with it scot-free. We always kept our doors locked at all times, so it would be extremely difficult for someone to just break in like that. Mind you, we had a dog too, so the fact that he didn't sense that someone else was in the house made the situation even more weird. This made my aunt and uncle believe that whoever was in our house was someone we knew. We almost never used the upstairs, as it was only for guests or for company staying over. My aunt had some valuable stuff in the closet of that room, nearly $5,000 worth of things, and most of it had been taken. The police had found no evidence as to who it might have been, and we aren't sure how they got away. My uncle believes it had to be through the upstairs window, but that hasn't been confirmed nor denied. 2 weeks later, my uncle had gone upstairs to fix a pipe that had apparently been leaking when he found something disturbing in one of the closets upstairs. He found various kitchen knives stabbed into the wall, along with several food wrappers and a sleeping bag. The sleeping bag was my uncle's. Whoever it was had been living in our home for God knows how long and had since been eating our food. In fact, this explains why we were so suspicious about how our food had been disappearing so fast. While my aunt and uncle believed it could have been someone we knew, I believe it had possibly been a squatter seeking shelter. This would explain why they were eating our food and why they had stayed in the house. We haven't seen that person since, and I'll always remember what happened that one Christmas. I'm a mother of 3, currently in my 30s, and this happened on Christmas Eve of last year, around this time. My boyfriend and I had split up due to reasons I won't go into, but needless to say, it was for the best. A quick side note, I had been in several toxic relationships before, but none were as bad as this one. I have 3 children, all boys, one being 14, another being 7, and one being 9, with my oldest being 14. He had helped me wrap the gifts for his siblings that night, as it was already hard enough for me, juggling everything on my own. For the sake of the story, I'll call him Jake. Being a mother preparing gifts alone was not easy, especially with such a short amount of time to get everything done before Christmas morning. It was around 2 a.m. when my oldest and I had just finished wrapping the presents and got ready to go to bed. As I was placing down the last gift, Jake tapped me on the shoulder and pointed to the living room window. At first, I thought it was just the dim light of the snow outside, but when I looked closer, my heart skipped a beat. There, standing outside in the pitch dark, was a dark figure, peering into the window. I froze for a moment, unsure of what I was seeing, but as the realization hit me, I felt a rush of panic. Someone was watching us. I don't know how Jake had seen her, but I'm thankful he pointed it out. Growing up, I was always taught how to handle situations like this. Never panic, always stay calm. But my heart was racing. I didn't waste time. I told Jake to stay behind me and stepped outside. The cold night air bit at my skin, but it wasn't the cold that made me shiver. The figure was still there, standing unervingly still in the snow. As I got closer, I could make out that it was a woman. But there was something wrong about her, something unsettling. It wasn't just the way she stood, staring into the window. It was her eyes. They were wide, almost unnaturally so, with no hint of recognition or apology. Just cold, blank eyes staring into ours like she knew something we didn't. I felt a chill run down my spine as I spoke to her, trying to keep my voice steady. "Please leave," I said, my voice sharp but calm. "You have no business here." To my surprise, she seemed to play dumb, as though she had no idea how strange the situation was. She apologized profusely, saying she had been trying to scare her friend and had gotten the wrong house. As she turned to leave, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. She kept glancing over her shoulder, her eyes fixed on us, her movements unnervingly slow. Jake stood beside me, his face pale. We didn't move until she had disappeared completely into the darkness. That was the last we ever saw of her, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The whole encounter felt too surreal, like it wasn't meant to happen. As we went back inside, I tried to brush it off as a harmless mistake, but my son was more skeptical. Jake didn't believe her story, and neither did I. Something about the way she acted, the way she stared at us, made me uneasy. It felt like there was a hidden agenda behind her words, like she wasn't telling us the truth about why she was really there. The whole night felt different after that. I kept the curtains drawn, double-checked the locks on the doors, and stayed awake longer than usual. It was as if her presence lingered in the air, a reminder that some things are better left unexplained. My son, especially, kept asking what her intentions were, his mind racing with possibilities. We never found out who she was or what she really wanted. But I can't help but wonder if there's more to that encounter than we'll ever know. Was she really just trying to scare someone? Or was there something else at play that night? I'll never forget the feeling in the pit of my stomach when I saw those eyes, unblinking, watching us, even after she walked away. It's a feeling I can't shake. And to this day, my son still asks about her, still wondering what she was really doing there. I don't know if we'll ever know the answer, but I'll never forget the strange, cold presence of that woman on Christmas Eve and the unsettling silence that followed her departure.